Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Welcome to the second episode in our friendship series. Today, you're hearing from Holly and I as we chat with Brandi Wilson about her leadership journey, which includes a devastating season of loss. She shares how community played a vital role in getting her through that season and why she's so passionate about helping other women find community. I absolutely love what Brandi has to say about what happens when your title is taken away from you, about why we need friendships with other female leaders, and how to support someone through a season of loss. I was so blessed by this conversation, and I hope you are too. I want to mention briefly that near the end of our conversation, we talk about Brandi's work with World Help in Thailand, and she shares about some of her experiences there witnessing the human trafficking that is going on. So please note that this is a sensitive topic, and you may not want to have little ears listening. For the show notes and the links that we mention in this episode, head over to estherlittlefield.com/episode 64. Now let's dive into the conversation. Hi, friend. I'm Esther Littlefield, and today I am so excited to be joined by my co-host, Holly, and our guest, Brandi Wilson. Brandi is the co-leader of Leading and Loving It, and she lives right outside of Nashville, Tennessee, with her 3 sons. She has been part of 2 church plants, the most recent being Crosspoint Church, located in Nashville, where she served for 14 years. When Brandi isn't following one of her boys to either a practice or a sporting event, she enjoys yoga, hiking, and time spent with friends. She loves all things cozy and comfortable and works hard to craft a simple life she loves living. So, Brandi, thank you for joining us today and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Awesome. So let's just get started. Why don't you just share with us about a little bit about yourself and tell us about your leadership journey?
Yeah. So to even think about talking about my leadership journey seems a little foreign because I think for years I've never considered myself a leader. I would have said I ended up in leadership by default because I ended up married to somebody who was in leadership and didn't recognize that in myself. So I feel like God has been super gracious in my journey to, as I've learned more about who I am as an adult and who I am as a Christ follower and who I am as his daughter, to also remind me that I am a leader in a lot of different ways. And for me, when I look at leadership, I first start at my home and how I lead these 3 boys that I'm raising, who are all this week, everyone has a birthday, and I'll have 3 teenagers.
Oh, wow.
So 18, 15, and 13. So my house is really loud and always very full, and God multiplies the snacks like the fish and the loaves. Somehow there's always Chips Ahoy in my pantry. I don't know how I still have snacks in there after I've had 15 kids, but I do. And it's, a little stinky at times, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. So for me, leadership first starts looking at my kids and how do I raise them to be the godly men that I've been entrusted with. And, guide their spiritual journeys and their interactions with God and the church. And also just remember that they are first and foremost God's, and he loves them more than I do. So that is a daily reflection I have is, leading my 3 sons as a single mom, raising 3 teenage boys in today's world. So, and then outside of that, leadership wise, I had 20 years of experience in church leadership, serving in senior leadership at 2 church plants, one in Kentucky. I was there for 5 years. And then here in Nashville at Cross Point Church, I was there for 14 years. So I have actually loved, when it comes to leadership, I have loved watching something super small, starting like super small and being part of growing something, which is also kind of the role I've had at Leading and Loving It, because when Leading and Loving It launched, my co-leader and the founder, Lori Wilhite, she actually launched Leading and Loving It for the ladies on her church staff.
Okay.
Her husband had moved to Vegas. They'd taken over this large church. They had a really large staff, and she knew, I cannot get all of the staff wives together, like one-on-one. I can't do that one-on-one. So how can I create something that reaches out to our staff as a whole? And she started a blog called Leading and Loving It, where she was just kind of writing through her own daily walk and learning about leadership, and realized pretty quickly that blog was not being read as much by her staff wives, but being read by more women across the United States who were in church leadership of some form. And I was one of those leaders. So I got the opportunity to hop on pretty early with Lori, and we were just, I call it, people talk about it being a mom and pop. Leading and Loving It kind of started as a mom and mom, because we were 2 moms who were in these roles that, we said a lot. I think the phrase that connected the 2 of us immediately was, I'm not the typical pastor's wife, because I had grown up in a traditional church. So in my head, I was a pastor's wife for 20 years. And in my head, the pastor's wife played the organ, and she probably taught children's church, and she might not have been the hippest dresser. So I just knew, for me, I was like, oh, I'm not the typical pastor's wife that I had seen growing up, even though I loved and respected the pastor's wives from my childhood, actually super close to both of the 2 that impacted me the most during my growing up years, formative years. But I knew that didn't necessarily fit who I was. So that was a phrase that we both kind of connected on. And from there, that just kind of grew. Like, if we don't consider ourselves to be typical pastors' wives, then what does that look like? And to be able to explore that together and bring other women along the journey of basically recognizing what God has called you to do, and finding the value and the importance of that, and not trying to be someone else, not trying to model and copy what someone else has done before you, but to really just take time and reflect on what has God called me to do, and love and accept that. And that's probably been like one of the biggest gifts of leadership, is in the journey of leadership, learning to love myself and love what God has called me to do.
I love that.
Okay, so Brandi, can you tell us when you realized that you were a leader, when you really internalized it for yourself?
Yeah. Gosh, I don't know that there is a specific moment for me that happened. I think for me, it's been little reminders along the way that have kind of pieced together a bigger, when I talk about, when I'm asked about my leadership journey and my personal journey, I do really see it as a stone path where it's kind of laid stone by stone, and then fits together like this beautiful puzzle. And I kind of understand it as I do it. I think I probably spent more time saying I wasn't a leader than I have spent saying I am a leader. But because of that, it's really one of the things I've noticed about myself over the last few years is pointing out leadership in other women. And, I'm very blessed to have lots of female relationships, and those relationships, I am the biggest proponent of cheering other women on. And that has happened so much in my life, and I love to give that to other people. But one of the things we do at Leading and Loving It is this virtual conference called Just One. We do it every spring. It started about 8 years ago when Lori had one of those ideas, and said, we should do this virtual conference. And we ended up calling it Just One because we realized when you got a bunch of women in the room that lots of times the questions were like, hey, what's just one thing you would tell me about parenting? Or what's just one thing you would tell me about being a woman in leadership? Or what's just one thing you would tell me about having friendships as leader? Or what just one thing you would tell me about dealing with criticism? So we developed this conference that has really been a virtual conference. It's free and anyone can watch at home in your yoga pants. It's actually emailed to you each morning for 14 consecutive days. But one of the things I've noticed as that conference gets bigger is the way it does impact other women who wouldn't consider themselves leaders. So I have this group of moms. There are 6 of us total. All of our sons play football together. So when I talk about them, I just refer to them as a group of the football moms, but we're all super close. We obviously spend every Friday night together for about 4 months in the fall, but even in off season, we get together about once every 4 to 6 weeks. And it's just been this really beautiful friendship among the 6 of us. But I was talking to one of the moms and she said, what are you doing for work right now? And I said, oh, I'm helping put together this conference and you should try it. And she was like, oh, I'm not a leader. And I said, Monica, what do you do every Wednesday night? And she said, oh, I teach a girls group at our church, a group of junior girls. I was like, how long have you been doing that? Well, this is my 2nd round. So this is my 7th year. I said, so every Wednesday night you go and you meet with a group of teenage girls and you walk them through life challenges. You walk them through difficult seasons in their life. You teach them biblical truth, right? She's like, yeah. I'm like, you're a leader. So I think lots of times, just as women, we serve in so many different capacities and we're natural helpers as moms and wives and sisters and daughters and friends that sometimes leadership is happening in our lives and we don't even realize it. So I think just helping other women recognize the impact that they have has been a gift to me, and recognizing my own leadership, being able to help other women recognize that has been awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I love just that power of calling out the leadership in others and how that can make such an impact on them. So you mentioned at the end of what you shared earlier about just kind of the beginning of your leadership journey, that a big part of it has been learning to love yourself and love where you are and where God has placed you. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you've learned to do that?
Yeah. Yes, I can. That's been my own personal journey has not been easy over the last 3 to 4 years. As I mentioned earlier, I was a pastor's wife for 20 years and I love being a pastor's wife. I love being part of the 2 churches that I helped plant. I loved my involvement with the staff. That was probably where I felt most alive, is just being able to encourage and love on the staff and check on them and have women's events and host women's events in my home for those ladies. So I loved being a pastor's wife. Unfortunately, about 3 years ago, my husband at the time made the choice to leave the church and to also leave our marriage and walk away from our family, which was not something I ever envisioned happening in my life. So I think at that point, once I was ready to come back to real life again, it was, as you can imagine, it was pretty devastating. But I realized in the middle of that, I have been devastated but not destroyed. So what does that mean? And that whole season is probably the point where I realized that the influence that those other female leaders had in my life, because I had counted myself out of ministry leadership, pretty much 100% counting myself out, and they wouldn't allow me to do that. So they stayed beside me through all of it. And then as I began to heal, they started pushing me forward. I remember, this is one of my favorite personal stories to tell about leadership, but right after my husband told me he wanted a divorce, we were having our huge event in Vegas that Leading and Loving It hosts every fall. It's called Retreat. It happens in October. You should definitely check it out. But we were getting ready to have that. And I host that. Lori and I have always done that together. She and I are on stage the whole time. We've spoken together. But one of the things that's made Leading and Loving It so successful is the natural friendship that Lori and I have that other ladies get to see. That happens on stage. That happens where I think lots of people are searching for that kind of community. So to get to see 2 people have that and have fun with it is great. So retreat is always a lot of fun. It's inspirational. But this year, that year I decided I wasn't going. It was too hard. I was no longer the pastor's wife at the church. I knew that I was moving towards a divorce. No one else knew that. Lori knew it. My parents knew it. That was it. So that was not public knowledge yet. But I remember calling her one day, and I'd already canceled my plane ticket. I was not in a good spot. I was like, I can't do it. Mm-hmm. And she called me one morning and she said, I've been thinking, I want you to just come to retreat. You don't have to see anybody. You can stay backstage the whole time. We always host like fun little after parties in our hotel room. We're not going to have anyone in our hotel room. And I just want you to be there. So I thought to myself, you know what? At this point, why am I staying in Nashville fighting for a marriage from someone who tells me they don't love me anymore, when I could go out there and be with Lori and Lisa Hughes, another dear friend of mine? I can go out there and be with two people who love me. And right now, I just need to be with a couple of people who love me. So I tell her, okay, I'll come. This is how Lori works. Y'all, if she ever asks you to do anything, Esther, you need all the details. Because what happens is
I'll keep that in mind.
I know you're interviewing her in a few weeks, so you just be careful. But she said, I said, okay, I'll come. So she gives me about 24 hours. She called me every day during my divorce. I still talk to her almost every day. So the next day, she might give me 2 days. She calls and she's like, hey, I want you to host one part of it, maybe just the opening. I want you and I have done this together. At that point, I think it was 6 years. We've done this together for 6 years. I think it's going to be good for you. I just want you to host one session with me. And I'm like, oh, I don't know that I can do it. I just, at this point, there are like blogs being written about the situation and everything felt so public. I was like, I probably am about 50-50 introvert, extrovert. So I was kind of like, oh, it's so many people. And she's like, just think about it. I'm like, okay. So she gives me another couple days and she brings it up again. I'm like, okay, I'll host it. I think I can do this. And she's like, I'm on stage with you. I've got you. If it's too much, you're fine. So I'm like, okay, I'll do it. She's like, great. I think you should host all of the sessions. At that point, it was like 5 or 6 sessions. I think you should host all of them. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And she's like, it's going to be fine. I'm like, okay. So we agreed to that. And then the next phone call, she said, I think you need to address the situation. Like there is an elephant in the room. And at that point, Esther and Holly, I had not used my voice at all in the course of what was going on. Mm-hmm. I had chosen to really isolate myself in what felt like a safe way. Mm. And I had people I talked to, and I was in therapy every week. So it's not like I was so isolated I was not seeing people, but I was just so broken and hurt that real life was overwhelming. So I only had about 4 to 5 girlfriends I talked to and my therapist. That's it. So she said, I think that this is something you should address. And I didn't know what to say. I had no clue. That situation felt obviously like a ton of rejection. Why does anyone want to hear from somebody whose husband has left her? Like, what is there to say? And she just really pushed me on it. And I flew out on Tuesday morning. The event kicked off on Tuesday, and I flew out super early that morning. And when I landed, Lori picked me. I mean, she's getting ready to pull off this event for 800 women, and she is the only person who will pick me up from the airport. So, she said, like, what have you thought about what you want to say? And I said, I think I just want to say there are a lot of question marks in my life, and there are a lot of things I don't know the answers to. But let me tell you what I do know the answer to. I know the answer that God is not done with me yet. And what that looks like moving on, I don't know. But I don't believe that he's brought me this far to leave me. And I also know that God doesn't use me because of a title that has been followed by my name for the last 20 years. He uses me for me. And I don't know what that means. But for me to have to process what I wanted to share with other women really pushed me to recognize what I believed about myself as a leader. And I think that's been the biggest thing that people have enjoyed hearing, regardless of what has quote unquote sidelined them in ministry, is that reminder that people can take away that title, but no one can take away God's calling on your life.
Mm.
So my leadership journey has not been pretty, but it has definitely been authentic, and it has been genuine, and it has been full of people who have loved me well along the way. And it's been full of a lot of hard work for me, for self-awareness. And it's also a journey that I wouldn't trade for anything. Like, I can say that at this point, that as much as I hate the situation that I've had to live through, and I hate what my kids have had to go through, I am grateful for the grace and the truth that God has given me to recognize the leadership in my own life.
Thank you so much for being willing to share that, because I know that sharing challenges and your most vulnerable points in life through leadership can be super difficult. And I loved what you said about sort of the power of community, those women who wouldn't let you sit back when you sort of counted yourself out from leadership. Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like, what exactly those people did and how they came around you?
Yeah, I'm super relational. Even though I would say I'm probably 50-50, maybe even like 60-40 of an introvert, I am super relational. So relationships have always been important to me. Since I was a little girl, girlfriends have always been something I have valued in my life, and I've worked hard to have healthy friendships. When we started figuring out what leading and loving it looked like, when we had our first retreat, which was here in Nashville, and had 140 ladies, I remember us discussing, like, what is our goal? And my goal was for everyone to leave with a friend, because what I had learned in my friendship with Lori, is that I was not lonely as a mom. I had lots of mom friends. I wasn't lonely when it came to like having those people to meet me for lunch during the week, or to help me pick out cute shoes for an outfit. But for me, I was lonely as a woman in leadership. And I realized I didn't have any friends who were peers at that level of leadership. So I think that's one of the reasons when she and I connected on Twitter initially, that it felt like such a great fit for me. So that's my heart, I think, at Leading and Loving It, is to help provide that community. Because I think as female leaders, sometimes it's not about what we say in our friendships together, it's about what we don't have to say. Because as leaders, we know what other people's life looks like behind the scenes. So for me, during that time, the things that I think were most vital during a traumatic situation like that is Lori did call me every day to hear my voice. So it would be, hey, how are you doing today? And when I answered her, she would kind of, no, she sounds strong. She sounds tearful. And what's so interesting is I've had so many people say to me since then, like, hey, I thought about you and I checked with Lori, and Lori said, she's strong. She's going to make it. I didn't feel that way. But I needed that other person who could reflect back to me. You're strong and you're going to make it. I think the other thing that was super helpful is my situation had a lot of, it has a lot of layers. It had a lot of deceit. It had a lot of hidden things. And Lori was really hidden things that were going on in my husband's life I wasn't aware of. And Lori was really great about not pushing me until I was ready to get there. So I think Lori and most other people could figure out what was going on behind the scenes. And I wasn't ready to admit that yet. So I didn't have a person who was saying, you need to see this, 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 this. I had a person who was willing to let me walk at my own pace, who didn't push me into a truth that I wasn't ready for, but was there to be beside me to help me process the truth when I realized it. So I think lots of times when we're going through a situation like this, and we can see in our friend's life that what the truth is, we feel the need to immediately share that and to push them into recognizing that truth for their own health. And pushing them into that truth often impacts that friendship. because then that person doesn't feel safe with you because you pushed them. They already don't feel safe in their situation that they're living in. I did not feel safe in my marriage. So what my friends did is they allowed me to feel safe in that friendship, and they didn't push me towards something I wasn't ready for yet. And I talk about Lori a lot in that friendship. I had Lori and I had the 4 other women I talked to, and all of those women. And you know what, Holly, is like my favorite thing when I look at that community that was around me during that time is those women were all in different seasons of life. So I have Lori and Lisa who we're like right at the same age. We've done the same thing. Our kids are the same age. So we're right here. Really, life looks really similar for us as far as parenting and that kind of stuff. Then one of my friends was 10 years older than me. She was in her second marriage. She has a blended family. Her second marriage is 20 years at this point. She and her husband have a blended family. He had 3 kids. She had 1. So they as a couple were great to me. It kind of felt like a big brother, big sister. So they're kind of in that next season of life. They have a couple of little toddler grandkids running around. Then I had 2 younger friends, and both of those younger friends had actually been super influential in my kids' life. One of them was an intern at Cross Point with me, and then when I was on staff there, and then the other was one of my kids' elementary school teachers. She actually had 2 of my 3 boys in 1st grade and 3rd grade. And my kids had invited her to church. So she actually ended up attending Cross Point. So I had an older, mentor type person. I had these 2 peers. And then I had these 2 younger girls who were great at checking in on me and loving me. They actually, for their age, I was surprised by their wisdom in a situation like that, but they were also great for my kids. So I had this community of girls who were not only loving me well, but were also loving my kids well through that. So I think that's one of the things that helps bond us when it comes to community and leaders is how those people love our families, because as moms, we're pretty protective of those kids. And to know that I wasn't alone in meeting the emotional needs of my kids during that time was huge. My kids needed other people who were checking on them and loving them, that they didn't, I have boys, so they're protective of mom. So there's this whole, if we bring something up, mom looks like she's had a sad day. So there were these people who were outside of our immediate circle that was also checking on them. So I think the layers of community that I had during that time, and I still have those women in my life, was huge for me. I just think the value of what we can offer each other as women in one another's life is such a gift during tough times and during great times, just to be able to celebrate one another.
Yeah. I think that just the idea of community and friendships, like you said, when you're a leader, there's just a different dynamic that happens. And so it's amazing. And it sounds like you had really already cultivated these relationships prior to that crisis situation. So you were already in a position to receive those, the support that they offered. So But a lot of the leaders that I talk to, I feel like leadership and friendship is one of the hot button issues.
Yeah.
Can you talk about a little bit more about how leaders can find a friend because some of us, I think of my area where I live, there's not it's not a huge population. And so the number of leaders in my area are less, and finding people that you can relate to, like you said, that there's certain things you don't even have to say. How do you recommend women make those friendships and build those relationships so that they do have the support when things are hard?
Yeah. And I get that that's not always easy for everyone. So I have counted my support system as one of my greatest gifts. So I get that that's not easy, and I get what a blessing that is in my life. I do think one of the benefits we have, and one of the things I think that, as a mom, I'm like, why does technology even exist? Because parenting in the social age media social media age is not easy, but it's a benefit for us when it comes to connection. I am so lucky that I am free call away, free calling to my best friend in Vegas and another best friend who's in South Beach or South Florida. And I think we have to be willing to take advantage of those situations. At Leading and Loving It, one of the biggest arms of our ministry is called Connect. And we do these Connect Live groups, which are just like the small groups that happen in your church. They happen via technology using Zoom. And they are very varied. Those Connect Live groups, some of them are for senior pastors' wives, church planners' wives. We've had them for administrative assistants of senior leaders. We've had them for ladies who run nonprofits. So there's just a huge variety of those groups. But what it does is it helps connect these women face to face via a computer screen, which, let's be honest, we're used to because that we stare at our phones all day long. So it sounds like one of those things like, oh, can real life connection be made via a computer screen? Well, guess what? You're doing it all day long in real life on your phone. So yes, it can happen. And you have to take advantage of that. So the thing I love about these groups are the stories that we've had come out of them. We've had a group of pastors' wives who were spread all over the United States. It was getting close to Easter, and they were talking about how they would never have the opportunity to worship together. So they decided at their meeting the next month, they were going to do communion together. So that they would all bring their own communion supplies. And as a group, I think there were 8 of them, they would talk about what communion looks like at their church, because what was so cool is they were all from different denominations. So there was an Anglican lady in there. There was a lady who's at a Baptist church. There were a couple of non-denominational churches represented. There was a Methodist, and I think the other one was maybe a Lutheran. So there were several different denominations that were in that group together, and they just sat down and they each talked about what communion looked like at their church, how it would be administered. The Anglican wife, her husband, the pastor, had to administer it to her. So he actually came in the room to serve her communion. So it sounds crazy to think about taking communion, privately with this group on Zoom. But because we're in leadership, lots of times all eyes are on us. So to be able to come together with that group of women and to have that sacrament together was really bonding for them. We also do Connect local groups, which meet in the same city. We have several of these going across the United States, and they meet monthly, usually at a coffee shop. We try to make both Connect Live and Connect Local pretty casual, because as leaders, you're usually planning everything else that's going on. So we want to just be able to show up. So they're usually at coffee shops. Sometimes they have curriculums or they read through a book together. Sometimes they just show up and talk about what's going on in life. But what that does is it connects people who are drawn that God is called to the same area. So these groups of ladies are loving the same people. They're loving the same communities. So they come together and they're from different churches and different roles, but they have the common call of location. So those ladies come together. We have a group in Canada last summer. Through a very tragic story, one of our Connect Local ladies up there lost her daughter. And she was actually at a retreat this fall, and she stopped Lori and I to introduce herself. And she also introduced us to her friend who was with her. And she said, we met through our Connect Local group. And when I lost my daughter, even though she's at a different church, she's the one who stepped in and helped us plan stuff. She helped communicate with our church. She helped communicate with our friends. And I have her because we were in a Connect Local group together. We don't serve on the same staff, but there's a bond created because we do the same thing in the same place. So I think looking for ways that might be non-traditional to connect with other women is huge. We have the opportunity to do it. We need to take advantage of it.
I love that. It makes me think so much of the community that I've been lucky to be a part of through my leadership journey. And, it's just, it really is, I don't want to be trite or whatever, but it can be life-changing when you have these women who are willing to just support you unconditionally and love you unconditionally. And in any way, it's fantastic.
So Brandi, I would love to go back a little bit because you shared, your very difficult journey of going through the divorce. And I would love to hear, how did you transition from, like you said, you had the title of pastor's wife for 20 years. How did you then transition, and what did it look like after that devastating circumstance for you to get back into leadership and take on a different role?
I'm going to tell you that was not easy, and I still don't totally have it figured out. That's probably what I'm in the midst of right now. And I, yeah, I don't know that I have that figured out. I know that I'm working toward it. I still grieve not being a pastor's wife, and I still grieve not being able to be involved in the church the way I was. I was at Cross Point for Easter. It was awesome. But, all week long, I was like, oh, it's Easter week. And I know it's all hands on deck. And those weekends are exhausting, but we also know they're very team building and they're very bonding, and everybody's working toward that common goal. And there's a lot of excitement. So when those big weekends come around, I'm like, oh, I miss being part of that. Our staff meeting and staff lunch was every Tuesday, and there is not a Tuesday that goes by, and it's been 2.5 years at this point. There's not been a Tuesday that I don't think about the staff. So I feel like God was very gracious to heal my heart when it came to the loss of my husband and his choice to leave. I think when I realized he was not the person that he had presented himself to be, and that there were all of these lies that had gone on for years and years and years behind our marriage, God was really gracious to heal my heart in that. I get lonely, but I don't necessarily miss that. However, I do miss being a pastor's wife. So finding a church to attend on a regular basis is a little difficult. My kids and I have a church we go to that I love called The Hills, and John and Kristen Ragsdale are pastors there, and they were our neighbors for 8 years in our last house. So I just kind of love how God gave us that safe place, but it's still not necessarily easy. So I've visited tons of churches in Nashville, and there's so many great churches here. So for me, it's not about not being able to find necessarily a great church. It is figuring out, how do I fit in to that now, because I loved what I did. So I would say my heart still grieves over the loss of being the pastor's wife and in leadership at a local church. However, I will say being able to transition from that to leading and loving it as an occupation. I volunteered at Leading and Loving It for 8 years with Lori. And in the course of my divorce, my background is in education. So I have a bachelor's and a master's in education and taught for 6 years. And during the course of my divorce, I actually took 2 different master's classes to get my license reinstated, because I'd stayed at home for, I don't know, about 12 years. And that license had lapsed. So I took both of those. Classes to get my license reinstated. And I was in the midst of finishing up that second class. And Lori said, what if we could hire you at Leading and Loving It? I know you're planning on going back into the classroom, but if we could hire you, is that something you would be interested in? And I remember knowing the fact that I was not, subconsciously, I had told myself, your relationships are going to change because you're not a pastor's wife anymore and you're going back into the classroom. So schedules look different and just all of that. I was already substituting, trying to get my foot in the door. So I was substituting, I was taking master's classes. I was fully moving toward, I'm going to teach again. And when she said that to me, I just knew. I had actually, the day before, I had prayed for hope. Like, God, I need some hope. And I meant in my marriage. I had counseling that afternoon. I knew I was going to a counseling appointment. And I remember it was a terrible appointment. And I remember leaving thinking, man, I just asked for hope. I just needed like one sentence. I didn't need a whole hour. I needed one sentence to give me a little bit of hope, because I'm fighting really hard. And it was that was a Monday. It was the following Tuesday morning. I was on the phone with Lori, just kind of downloading life. And at the end of that conversation, she said, would you be interested in taking a job with us? And I just felt like this tiny whisper of, I told you I was going to give you hope. Because for me, it was reminding me, as I said earlier, that title might be gone, but that calling in your life isn't. And you do have 20 years of ministry experience that I'm not going to waste. So this is going to work out for you. And, even though you don't know how, and it looks kind of crazy, I've got your back. So yeah, it's definitely been a transition I'm still figuring out, but very blessed to be where I am today.
Yeah. Every time I hear a woman's story, I'm never not in awe of God's faithfulness to us. Like, every time I hear it, I know it's true. And I know that it's this still an abiding thing in our lives, but I'm always surprised. I'm always in awe, even though I know it's a real thing. And I just love that story about his faithfulness to you. And I love that you said that, because I was going to ask you about how you became involved in leading and loving it. And so you perfectly transitioned into that. But could you define your role a little bit for us? What do you actually do there?
Yep. What do I do there? So my title would be Director of Impact, which means I work with partners and sponsors on like year-long partnerships and sponsors for our event to match those up. I work with that. I also work with our Connect, which I talked about earlier, Connect Live and Connect Local, and kind of oversee all of that. And then, I would say Lori and I do a lot of the creating of planning and content together. I know we kind of highlighted a little bit of that before we actually started recording, but just like downloads of, I think the thing that made Leading and Loving It work well is that we wanted to take what we had in our friendship and give it to other people. And we wanted to there were like 5 senior pastors' wives in the very beginning that connected on a regular basis. And that's when we were like, how do we, for instance, if we're connecting, we were using Skype at that point. And I remember we had gotten Kay Warren to do this Skype session with the 5 of us. So my kids were little, and I remember saying, Mommy's going to get on a call upstairs on her computer with a very important pastor's wife. You cannot come in the room unless you've broken a limb or you're on fire. Because it was my first time to, meet Kay on Skype. And what's so funny is that year when I went to Mother's Day, my son was in kindergarten and they had to write things about me. And he said, my mom is a very important pastor's wife because she knows another very important pastor's wife.
I love it.
Evidently, I had really emphasized how important Kay Warren was, and they needed to be quiet. But that happened to where it's the 5 of us and Kay, and we like peppered her with questions, and she was so gracious. Those just one questions, and we were like, Lori and I were thinking, how can we give that to other people? So from that, we took that idea of what worked for us and tried to make it work for a larger community. So we developed these roundtables, which was one of us meeting with other pastors' wives, and they would be topical, like friendship, criticism, that kind of stuff. And then it just kind of kept growing. We were like, we feel like we've given all the wisdom that we have. So how can we make this something ongoing? And that's when we started the Connect Live groups. I can't remember what they were initially called, but everything has just kind of, it's been us taking what works for us and how can we offer that to a bigger audience. So I think Lori and I still do that today as far as, what curriculum needs to be created. What are some devotions that we can have written and put on YouVersion or put on our website to help meet the needs of women in leadership? We exist to empower women to love life and ministry. So what can we do to make sure that we're meeting that vision? So I think a lot of my job too is just some of those downloads with Lori and dreaming and helping make those things happen.
Yeah.
So long answer to their question.
No, I love it though. I love it. And we talked about this again before we were recording, but can you talk a little bit about how you and Lori have worked together and your different personalities and how you figured out how to navigate that? Because I think in leadership, especially as women, we often have, a lot of really, really fun ideas, but then we have to figure out how we're going to work together to bring that vision to life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. She and I have a lot, like so much in common, and we get along great. But personality wise is very different. I don't know. Do y'all do Enneagram? Do you know
Yes.
Enneagram? Lori says she's a 0 because that's the level of interest she has in the Enneagram. They'll probably use that on you when you record with her. She has no interest. I know with the Enneagram, you're supposed to figure it out yourself.
Yes.
Well, she didn't do that, so I figured it out for her. So she is an 8. And the quote that helped me realize that I think she's an 8, I don't even think I've told her yet, is, they say healthy 8s. So 8s often pave over people, but a healthy 8 paves the way for people. And then I kind of go back and forth. I think I'm a 2. I'm either a 2 or a 9. Either way, I'm not a strong personality. We also have done the thinking wavelength, which we went through Stratop a year ago with Doug Slayball, who is awesome. And he took, I think there were 12 women, who were tied to leading and loving it in the Stratop. We were his first all girl crew. And I like to call us his favorite ever. And he laughed at us because all 12 of us wrote down every word he said. And he was like, "Man, do not do this when I work with him." But one of the things Doug uses is called the thinking wavelength. And it runs from 1 to 9, I think. And it's just how we develop ideas, how we function in a work environment, how we work with others. And when we look at that thinking wavelength, Lori's definitely higher and she falls, I think she's a 7.5. But that visionary entrepreneur loves to create new things. And I'm more along the 4.5 wavelength. And that's more of, I can do the administrative stuff. I don't hate it. It probably is not where I'm going to thrive. But what I am good about is managing people, overseeing people, meeting with people. That is kind of where my wheelhouse is. So we actually kind of complement each other really well when it comes to leadership. I do tease her because she calls me all the time and she's like, "I have an idea." And I'm like, "Oh no, here we go." But it's figuring out. That's one of the reasons I think when it comes to leadership and working with others, that examining those personalities and figuring out, even how a personality hears criticism and responds to criticism, how you can speak into their life, what sounds like encouragement to them. Because the way you feel and receive encouragement might not be what works for them. So I think when you're working closely with other people, figuring out those personalities and how to best accompany one another and complement one another is huge.
So I love that you said that, because I think that if one of the very first things that Esther and I talked about when we started this podcast was self-awareness, and how that's a huge thing for leaders, and how these different tools can sort of help us become self-aware, because without them, we sort of feel like we are the right way of thinking and how we process things is the right way. And why doesn't anyone else do it this way? And so when we come to understand different personalities and use different tools to do that, it can just enrich our leadership so much more, because we can understand where people are coming from. They're not doing it wrong. They're just thinking the way that they were wired. And I think that that really complements our leadership when we can sort of figure those things out about ourselves and about others.
I think the thing about self-awareness too is once you start it, it's hard to stop it,
Yeah.
because it is one of those things so much makes sense that it's, once you start figuring those pieces out, it's like, oh, now I'm understanding myself. Now I'm understanding this person I'm in a relationship with, or this person that's my direct report, or whatever it is. So once you start that journey of self-awareness, it's hard to stop it.
Well, and I think it makes it easier to accept the way God has wired us and actually work in our strengths when we can become aware of them. And like you said earlier, not try to be doing or being like another person that we may look up to, and we try to emulate everything they're doing. Well, it might not work because God hasn't wired us that way.
Yeah.
Yep.
When I realized in my own personal walk, oh, God doesn't need me to be Kay Warren, and God doesn't need me to be, Lisa Young, and God doesn't need, because he's already got a Kay Warren, he's already got a Lisa Young, and he's already got a Lisa Harper. What God wants me to be is Brandi Wilson. That was freedom. That was, oh, okay. So then let's look at, and I've taken amazing things away from all of those women. But for me to recognize oh, God's already got an Esther and God's already got a Holly, and my job is to be Brandi. That was very, very freeing for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
To switch gears just a little bit, I know that you've done some traveling around the world with World Help. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Why it's important to you? Maybe where you've gone with them?
Yes. Well, I actually love traveling for mission work, and I've gotten to do that a lot just being involved in the church. And it's one of those arms of leading and loving it that we've wanted to develop for a while. So we partnered with World Help. I think we're in our 7th year of working with World Help, and we did several trips with them to Guatemala. Most recently, last summer, we went to Thailand, and I'm actually going back in July with World Help and doing another influencers trip to Thailand, kind of a vision trip. But I fell in love with Thailand, and I fell in love with what World Help is doing there because Thailand has a huge sex slavery industry.
Mm.
In fact, they would call it a culture. It's a sex culture because what happens in Thailand is the oldest daughter is usually responsible for taking care of the parents financially. So often the girls who are living in villages, they come to the big cities like Bangkok and Pattaya for work. And the work that they end up getting is working in bars, dancing, and then going home with men later that night. So World Help took us over there to raise our awareness on that. And what they did so well is they let us see that bar scene and they let us see what a typical night looks like for those girls. But they also took us to their Hello Freedom houses.
Mm.
And the Hello Freedom houses are homes over there where the girls who leave, they go into these homes, and World Help takes care of providing their curriculum that they learn, medical expenses, education, food and shelter, and also introduces them to Jesus. They continue to send money home to the families so that the girls are not forced back into the work in order to provide for their families. But we got to see the girls who are living the life now and then see the girls who are living the life of freedom in these Hello Freedom houses. So one of the things that we have worked hard at Leading and Loving It is to actually fund a baking school. Baking is considered very elite in Thailand because culturally all the food is cooked on a stovetop. So when you go into an average home in Thailand, they don't have an oven. So baking is kind of for like the top of the financial earning people are the ones who have ovens in their home. So one of the things that they're doing is creating a baking school where these girls will learn a trade that can help them get a job outside of the sex industry, whether it's working at a hotel, creating baked goods, or working at a school, or, opening their own shop. But we at Leading and Loving It worked to raise $125,000
Oh, wow.
to build out this baking school. We just finished it last month. We just finished raising the
Oh, that's
the baking
amazing.
school is in the process of being completed. They had the building, so we're doing the build out, and it was really great to be there because they have their vision is to open a tiny restaurant in the bottom of the baking school, and they have a garden that sits between the baking school and the Hello Freedom House, and they'll raise vegetables and mushrooms and all of that kind of stuff that they'll be able to serve in the restaurant, as well as teaching the trade of baking. So when I go back in July, I'll get to see, it won't be finished, but it's definitely in the process of being finished. But the baking school that is going to help introduce these girls to freedom and break that cycle of sex culture in their life.
Wow. So powerful. And I know I've followed you guys when you were on your trip and followed you on Instagram and watched everything that was going on. It's just really, I think one of the things that I've felt like as a leader is our responsibility to share with others what we become aware of. And I think
Right.
that's what you have done really well at Leading and Loving It is you not only are focused on let's pour into these leaders and give them the support that they need, but also let's look at the world around us and how can we make an impact outside of our own
Yep.
four walls. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really appreciate you doing that.
To help give those girls a voice. Like that's one of the things I was so impacted. I knew what I was going to see going into it. World Help prepped you really well for what you're going to see and be able to handle that emotionally and mentally. But there's a difference in hearing about it and seeing it. So
Yep.
I knew I wanted to help before I went, but then when I went over there and I saw the thousands and thousands and thousands of girls every night, that more girls than you can count. I was overwhelmed by the number of girls. And then I was also overwhelmed that as an individual, these girls are not called by names, they're called by numbers. So when you see the girls in the bar, or if you see them outside the bar, they have a button, the little round button attached to some part of their body. They're very scantily clad, so it's kind of hard to find a spot to put them. And that button and that number is how they're identified.
Wow.
And to realize that they weren't called by name, they were just number 72. That was just devastating to me. So to be able to have the opportunity to, help these girls be introduced to freedom via a baking school, it's about introducing those girls to who they are and helping them find their voice. So yeah, that was a huge trip for me personally. I loved it. I've been super honored to be a part of it. Our community at Leading and Loving It just jumped on board and helped us reach that goal. Because when we heard $125,000, I think we were all like, that's a lot of money. And, we were lucky that our community hopped in and stood beside us to help reach that goal.
So as we sort of wrap up, and I've loved the conversation that we've had and just the different aspects of things that we've been able to talk about, I'm wondering if you could share some advice from all the things that you've been through, your leadership journey personally, the things that you've seen around the world. Give some advice to a younger leader who's just starting out in ministry or her career. What things would you tell her?
Yeah. I think there are probably two things that I would tell her. One is to enjoy every season, because I think sometimes we're in leadership, we just think, if I had more people, or if, we had more money, or if we had a building, and we live life thinking about how it would be better in the future rather than recognizing the sweet season that we're in. When it comes to church planning, I've been part of two churches that started with very small groups of people in homes and grew to make large impacts in those communities. And I can say I really enjoyed every season. I enjoyed the season of setup when there were chairs that were being drug out. I enjoyed the season when in the first church plant, I felt like we had a ton of single moms. And I remember thinking, like, we need some men in this church. Being able to look back and think, like, man, that was such a precious season with a bunch of single moms who all had a kid or two that needed to be loved on, and they were loved on by that church community. So enjoy every season when you're in it. And I think the other piece of advice that, it's something I am saying to myself a lot right now, is just take one day at a time. I can get so overwhelmed thinking about the fact that I have a kid who's going to college in a year and a half, and I have, an event that we need to pull off in October, and what, is next for me in my career, and what is next for me in my future. And I can tend to live life in the future if I'm not recognizing the importance of today. So I think for me, I'm learning to plan for the future, but to live in the today and to just take one day at a time. Anytime I wake up overwhelmed, in the middle of my divorce, I remember thinking, like, where are we going to live? And how am I going to make a living? And how am I going to pay for this? And I thought, okay, Brandi, what do you need to do today? What is the must have? Have the conversation I need to have today. Make the phone call I need to make today. Pay the bill I need to pay today. So to really focus on what I need to be doing today and to take life one day at a time.
Mm. Such wise advice for all of us. And I appreciate everything you've shared, Brandi. I really appreciate your openness to share the difficulties of leadership that you've been through, but also a lot of the joys and the blessings you've had. So can you share with us just how people can connect with you? If they want to connect with you after hearing your story, what would be the best place for them to do that?
Well, you can find out more at leadingandlovingit.com. If you're a woman in ministry who's looking to love life in ministry, then definitely go to leadingandlovingit.com for me. And we're on Instagram and Facebook. There's a private page on Facebook specifically for women in ministry to have conversations that they might not want to have publicly. So there's a private Facebook page as well as a public Facebook page. For me, I am Brandi and Boys just about everywhere. On Instagram and Twitter, I'm Brandi and Boys, Brandi with an I. And on Facebook, I'm Brandi Wheeler Wilson. So they can find me there as well. But Instagram is my favorite social media choice.
Yes. Awesome.
But it's a place for me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We'll put all the links to those in the show notes so people can click right to the place they want to connect with you. And again, we want to thank you for being part of the podcast today and for sharing everything that you did.
Well, thank you for having me. I had a blast with you too.
Thanks for joining us on the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider leaving us a rating and review in your podcast app? This helps more women just like you find the podcast, and it also helps them to know whether the podcast would be a good fit for them. Just go to the show in your podcast app, then scroll down until you see the option for ratings and reviews. From there, you can tap to rate and write a review. It means the world to us when you take a couple minutes to do this, and thank you so much to everyone who has left a review. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.